Good afternoon, everyone. I hope that everyone here is well and safe and that you can all hear me on this webinar. Thank you for joining me. My name is Samantha Levy. I'm New York Policy Manager for American Farmland Trust, and I lead our farm to school policy efforts here in New York State, which includes leading the New York Grown Food for New York Kids Coalition. And we as a group advocated for the New York State Farm to School Reimbursement Incentive, which is the subject of this webinar. And I co-authored this report that I'll be presenting on today and co-led this research. So during this webinar, I'm going to be providing some background on farm to school, particular to New York State. I'll be presenting on our research and evaluation of the New York State Farm to School Reimbursement Incentive. And I'm going to put forward our findings and some recommendations that came out of this research, both for New York State to learn how to move forward and unlock the enormous opportunity of farm to school in our state. And then also provide ideas, thoughts, and recommendations that are relevant for other states that are joining us to learn more about this program. And for those that haven't yet seen our report, that can be found at farmland.org/growing opportunity, the two words you see before you on the screen. And at any point, if you have any questions, please type them into the question box, and we'll have time for Q&A later on in the webinar. But before we get started, I wanted to launch a poll to learn where folks work on farm to school. So it looks like we're collecting responses. I can't see the poll right now, but yes, people are clicking. And I'll leave this open for another minute. Looks like we've got 70% having voted, 72%, 74%, we're still going up, so I'm going to keep it open, 79%. All right, so we're at 86%. At about a minute, I'm going to close this poll. So it looks like we've got 5% of folks on the webinar today who work for New York State government, 12% for another state, 5% for USDA, 16% working for a school or BOCES, and 62% working for a nonprofit, for-profit company, or extension. So that's great. I just realized that I didn't share the results, so now you can also see them, even though I have read them out. And then I'm going to ask another question just to get to know the folks on this webinar a little bit more. And hopefully folks can again see the presentation slide. And now if you could just take a moment to write in your chat box why you're joining us today and what you hope to get out of this webinar so that I can respond and make sure that I give it to you to the best of my ability. And while you do that, I'm going to begin by introducing American Farmland Trust and Farm to Institution New York State, in case folks don't know who we are. And I don't yet see anybody writing in the chat box, so please do fill that out and send it so that I can get to know a little bit about you. So while you do that, so American Farmland Trust is the organization behind this effort. American Farmland Trust is a national nonprofit founded in 1980, committed to saving the land that sustains us. That's our mission. And we do that nationally in the United States and through field offices across the US. One of our field offices, of course, is in New York. And many of you, if you're joining us from other states, may have folks from other field, folks at other field offices that serve your area. And we move this mission forward by protecting farmland from development, promoting sound farming practices on farms, and by keeping farmers on the land. So it's like the three legs of the stool of our mission. The Farm to Institution New York State, or the Farm to School work, is a part of the third stool leg, keeping farmers on the land. So developing viable markets for farmers to sell into so that they can stay financially viable and stay on the land. Through that, we coordinate Farm to Institution New York State, or FINESS. Some of you may be familiar with this. Are we having technical difficulties? Are folks getting audio? Yes, okay, great. So Farm to Institution New York State, or FINESS, is a collaborative initiative led by American Farmland Trust in partnership with many organizations across New York State, working to strengthen the economic security of farmers and the health of New Yorkers by empowering institutions to spend at least 25% of their food budget on foods grown in New York. And this includes institutions like K through 12 schools, but also institutions like universities, hospitals, correctional facilities, etc. And before I go on, I just want to take a moment to provide some acknowledgments. First, I want to thank the New York State Health Foundation and members of American Farmland Trust for financially making this report and presentation possible. I also want to thank our partners at the New York Grown Food for New York Kids Coalition, so many organizations and schools and passionate folks across New York State that advocated for this program and continue to work on farm to school and farm to school policy to this day. Of course, have to thank Governor Cuomo, the New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets, and the New York State Education Department for proposing this program, and then members of the state legislature for making sure that it got passed and that it continues to this day. And that includes Senator Metzger, chair of our Senate Agriculture Committee, Senator May, chair of the Legislative Commission on Rural Resources, and Assemblywoman Lou Pardo, chair of the Assembly Agriculture Committee. I also want to take a moment to acknowledge this moment that we're in. Farm to school is probably not top of mind for many of us in the middle of a pandemic and with schools scrambling to reopen and develop plans. But we do still think that this is a relevant, important program and effort to talk about. So appreciate you taking the time to be on the webinar with us today. So thank you. So moving along, I'm going to give a little bit of background on Farm to School. Some of these are things that many of you know, but it provides the basis for why we worked on this, why we work on this program, and why we advocated for it in New York. So for those that are working to build their own reasoning for why they might do this in their own state or nationally, this is really why. So first, what all of you probably know, what Farm to School is. So our definition, Farm to School programs work from the cafeteria to the classroom to increase access to healthy, fresh, local food in schools and teach kids about agriculture and good nutrition while supporting farmers and building the local economy. And then in terms of that last piece, building the local economy, economic benefits of farm to school are really enormous. So this presents, in many cases, new market opportunities for farmers, helping them to diversify and manage risk. And then in addition, there's quite a bit of research looking at the economic impact specifically. Generally, research reveals that each dollar invested in farm to school stimulates an additional between 60 cents and $2.16 in the local economy, and that for every job that is built through farm to school, that 1.67 more jobs are created in the local community. And this is all really important, of course, as we're thinking about economic challenges that we're facing and rebuilding. And for New York in particular, Cornell did a study revealing that just one farm to school purchase, just putting one fruit or vegetable item once per week on the menu at schools would increase revenue for our vegetable farmers by over $9 million, or for our fruit growers by over $5 million. And citations for these statistics are all in our report. All right. And then I'm actually going to take a moment here to just very quickly look, working on getting funding for a local reimbursement in Utah. So I saw that these were submitted in the question box. Great. Great. So I will be able to provide an update and ideas about how you might do this in your own state as well. So in terms of the health benefits of farm to school for our kids, this is really another piece that's critically important for the reason why we work on this. And on average, you may be aware that about half of a child's daily nutrition or calories come from school. And part of the big impetus for doing this work were some statistics that came out of the New York State Department of Health recently, that 1 in 3 kids and teens under the age of 18 in New York are overweight or obese, which are record highs. And forgive the use of this term right now, but that seems like an epidemic at the moment. In addition, almost 1 million kids across New York State are food insecure and do not have consistent access to the food they need. Since so much of their calories come from schools, this is a really important way to get fresh local food into their bellies. And that number is almost certain to be higher at this point, more than 1 million kids across state facing food insecurity. And on average, just under half of students statewide are eligible to receive free and reduced price lunch. So we see this as an egalitarian way to increase access to healthy local food for citizens and future citizens. And I didn't put this up here, but there are shown to be academic benefits to increasing access to fresh food. That is in our report as well. So these are some of the justifications and opportunities that we see for really improving the health and well-being of the 1.7 million children in New York's K through 12 schools. And so this is a big part of the reason why we do this from the heart. And now just a real quick history lesson on farm to school in New York State so that other states can compare where you're at in terms of your farm to school programs. So in 2001, the state created the farm to school program in statute. Then in 2015, Governor Cuomo launched the Farm to School Grants program, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that is later. In 2017, AFT and Finesse formed the New York Grown Food for New York Kids Coalition. And then in 2018, Governor Cuomo announced the No Student Goes Hungry initiative, which is really why we're here today. So here's what this initiative did. This initiative created the nation-leading 30% New York State Farm to School purchasing incentive. While we're all here, it was created to address the greatest barrier that schools reported facing in supporting local farmers, which was cost. Said that it was just too costly to increase the amount of food they're able to purchase from local farms. So this was really created to address that barrier. And this initiative also doubled the state's investment in the Farm to School Grants program, which invests in training, equipment, and staff. So additional staff to help schools get on the pathway to reach 30%. And you can see from Chloe Marshall, formerly with the National Farm to School Network, that she said that this program, this incentive is probably the most ambitious that we have so far in terms of per meal incentives in the nation. So we're pretty proud of it. For those that don't know, I'm just going to quickly talk about the nitty-gritty, how this incentive works. So for school food authorities in New York State that spend at least 30% of their lunch food costs on food from New York farmers, growers, producers, and or processors, they quadruple their per lunch meal reimbursement from the state from 6 cents, where it had been for the past 40 years essentially, to 25 cents during the following year. So it's a 19-cent incentive per meal, and a fairly good, sizable one, I would say, a pretty generous one. And a note on that processor piece, you'll notice that that's there. For processed products to count towards the 30%, they need to be made up of at least 50 0.1% raw agricultural ingredients from New York State. So this is a program really meant to benefit our farmers while increasing access to healthy local food for our kids. And then if you look here, you'll see a snapshot timeline of what this program implementation looks like. So each year, the program's in effect. It runs from September to June. In some cases, it may run longer, but schools apply by August, and the deadline has been set mid-August. And then in the fall, our state education department that really holds the statutory responsibility for this program reviews applications. But of course, they've worked closely with our Department of Agriculture and Markets on this program and continue to. And then for those schools that are successful, that are deemed successful, in the following year, they receive the extra reimbursement per meal. So hopefully that's clear. And like I said, if anybody has any questions at any point, just put them in your question box and I'll be sure to answer them later. So real quick, we're going to look at what happened in year one, because this passed in 2018. So it was the 2018-19 school year that was our first year that this program was in effect. And it's our only full year to date. So schools are applying for year two currently, and that deadline is this month. So we'll have more information about year two in a few months. But as of fall 2020, or that actually should be 2019, 7 school food authorities were deemed successful, including Buffalo Public Schools, which is the second largest school district in the state. And they're serving meals to about 29,000 kids each day. And these schools combined provided New York grown food to nearly 35,000 students daily while spending almost $3 million on food grown in New York State. This does not represent all farm to school spending in the state by any means. It's just the amount that was captured in this program. In fact, there were more school food authorities that applied originally, and if you add up all that they spent, it was nearly $10 million spent, and serving to tens of thousands of students daily. And just a quick note about Buffalo Public Schools, they more than doubled their spending on local produce from $300,000 to $700,000, while also buying more New York milk and meat. So this really did stimulate a lot of market behavior for them and for other schools. And here's where we come in, because we wanted to know, is this program doing what it was meant to? Make sure that we're on the right track to addressing the barriers and make sure that schools feel they have a pathway to reaching 30%. So AFT conducted some research last summer, 2019. We did a sample of a little over 300 school food authorities, and we sent a survey to all of them. We had a 59% response rate, and we conducted some case study interviews with 15 schools, including New York City, and compiled all this into a report, which we released this year, January 27th. And as I said, is available at farmland.org/growing-opportunity. But during this webinar, I'll be going through everything of note that we found, or a lot of the things of note that we found. And here's just a little timeline in the 2019 year of what we did when. And we asked what schools were buying, whether they thought they would reach 30% in the future, asked those that thought they would be successful how they did it, what they attributed their success to, and asked everyone about any other barriers that remain in buying New York grown food or reaching 30%. And just keep in mind that the information following is on the 2018-19 school year. I realize we are living in a different world now, and we're actually doing some more research this summer, a follow-up to this effort, and we'll be releasing an addendum report this fall, so look out for that. Before we get into it, I guess this is the nature of a webinar, but I really feel like I'm talking at or to you a lot, and I'd like to hear from you. So I'm curious what you think we might have learned during this effort. And I'm going to give you a minute to type into the question box what you think we might have learned. So we have one informed guess that it's harder to make it happen than anticipated. Yes. Let's see if anyone else has any thoughts. Oh, hi, Glenda. So nice that you're on. And yeah, sorry I said the chat box before. I do mean the questions box. Great. And actually, I just want to take a moment because I'm seeing some comments about audio, just to make sure that everyone can hear me, we're on the right track. Maybe my organizers can let me know if we're having any audio issues. It goes on and off. Okay. Sounds good to some. Thank you.
Sam, it sounds perfectly clear to me. I would suggest to anyone who's having audio issues that if you are having audio problems and you're using computer audio to try to call in on your phone, and vice versa. If you're called in on your phone and you're having audio problems, to maybe try using your computer audio. Sometimes it's an individual connection problem.
Okay, thank you for that, Ashley. I'll make sure that people can hear the information. Okay, so folks want to learn or think that we learned the importance of clear reporting guidelines. Maybe that schools need a larger incentive, what people are actually spending most of their money on. We did learn some of that potentially it's hard to track local, that maybe only larger farms were impacted, that it's easy to buy New York foods but hard to get reimbursed. Unfortunately, not enough districts were able to meet the criteria. How to handle reporting requirements. Folks know that we have a whole day-long summit about that tomorrow. Okay. And we got a question about the deadline that I'll answer later. And all right, great. So I'm going to move us along. All right. And I'm going to get to our research results. So thank you for participating in that and providing me with some feedback. So I feel like there are people here with me. So a quick overview of our results. We go into a lot more detail in our report. So year one, what are schools buying? During the 2018-19 school year, we found that schools reported purchasing more New York grown and raised fruit, fluid milk, vegetables, dairy products, and protein. And that compared to past years, 63% of schools purchased more New York grown fruit, and just about half purchased more New York grown vegetables to serve in their school cafeterias. All that seemed very positive to us. We also learned that future purchasing of New York food products were expected to generally increase. We asked schools, do you expect to increase, decrease, or stay the same? And about 3/4 said they expected to increase their local purchasing, and decrease was an available option, but it was not selected by any respondent, which was pretty positive to us. And then in terms of what schools want to buy more of, this is a short list here, and we have a much longer list in our report, but this shouldn't come as a huge surprise to anybody. We are an apple and dairy state. And the big thing that we found, we asked schools, how long do you think it'll take you to get to 30% if you have the right support? And with the right support, about 3/4 of schools said, we think we can hit 30% within 5 years. And we did some calculations and found that this would increase school spending on food from New York farms to $150 million, while increasing access to healthy local food to almost 700,000 kids. And that is quite a positive impact to be reporting, particularly when we need economic stimulus in our state. In addition, we found using a conservative local multiplier, we found that the New York State Farm to School Purchasing Incentive had the potential to generate over $210 million in total economic impact statewide within 5 years, while costing the state less than $95 million, or even less throughout the course of the next 5 years. To me, that seems like a pretty good return on investment, personally. Now, how do we get there? What do schools need? How do we address the remaining challenges and barriers to unlock this full potential? And this might be getting into some of the areas that folks wrote into the question box before. Now, when asked about buying New York grown food generally, these were our responses that we got, weighted by frequency chosen and by assigned importance or ranking. And the first, most often chosen, was cost, still. Second was that the growing season doesn't coincide with the school year. Third was that their vendor doesn't offer New York food products. The fourth, farmer won't deliver to them. And the fifth, that procurement rules are complicated. It's also important to note here that for schools that don't currently buy New York grown food, lack of staff time jumped to be the number 3 reported barrier right here. So for those that aren't yet buying New York grown food, they feel they just don't have the staff time and capacity to do it. That's really important to keep in mind. However, we also asked, what are your challenges to achieving 30% and participating in this program? Number one was that the 30% threshold was just too high. 62% of respondents said that. But when you look at this list, the first thing that we noticed was that the cost fell from 1st to 6th when put in the context of this program. So in the first question, we're asking, what's your barrier to buying New York grown food in general? In the second question, we're asking, what's your barrier in reaching 30% or participating in this program? So there is evidence that this program is doing something to address that cost barrier, or the perceived ability to overcome that barrier. And some of our interviews provided some further evidence, with a food service director from the Greater Southern Tier BOCES saying, prior to the incentive, they would have said that cost was their largest barrier, but now with this new 19 cents, not as cost sensitive as they were before. Next, the guidelines for this program were released in December of year 1 of the program, so December of 2018, and that did hamper some schools' ability to participate. But it is really important to note that the State Department of Education and the Department of Ag and Markets worked really hard to get the guidelines out as quickly as possible. So for schools that are looking to implement a similar type of incentive or program, it's probably worthwhile to make sure you have those ready to go so that schools can hit the ground running once the program is announced. And I also want to give credit to the agencies and to the partners that are working to continually make sure we get clear guidance, and that's really what tomorrow's summit is all about. And for those that want more information on that, feel free to reach out to me. My email will be on the webinar later. All right, and then moving on, somebody already wrote something about this in the question box, that separating out lunch was a barrier. And this was a barrier for schools that made 30% and for schools that didn't. This is not something that schools naturally do. Separating out lunch was a barrier because of the administrative time it takes to do it properly. And additionally, in our research, we found some evidence of creative accounting or creative compliance, that schools that were purchasing food from New York farms for breakfast or for other school meals were shifting all of those purchases to be served at lunch so that they could get closer to that 30%. And certainly we wouldn't want to have a program that is just shifting access to food to one meal versus really actually increasing and stimulating increased purchases in the marketplace. So I'll get back to that a little bit later. Next, of course, New York food procurement is a challenge. Some folks, as somebody pointed out in the chat, schools really aren't aware of how to use geographic preferencing or to purchase local while following local, state, and federal regulations. So there's a training gap there, but also it could be made a little easier. We'll go into that a little bit later. And then, so then what is the right support? What do we learn from those challenges and barriers? And how do we get those 72% of schools to 30% in 5 years or more? And we have some evidence of what that right support is. First, we asked schools that anticipated applying for the 30% what they attributed their success to. And these were their responses: really proactivity in their menu planning, the longevity of their program, support and working together, cooperative purchasing or support from extension, community and administrative support were huge. And then we asked schools generally, what do you need to get to 30%? And these were the overwhelming responses: that they need more New York food products offered by their main vendors, those that are answering the bids that they put out, or a list of New York producers to buy from to make it easier. That goes back to that administrative staff barrier, time barrier that I pointed out before. Lowering the threshold, of course, it's a challenge for schools. But, you know, I think that with the right support, schools might be able to get there. So it's a challenge, we don't want it to be insurmountable. More minimally processed New York products was another request, specifically because our growing season doesn't coincide with the school year, and also to get products to schools in forms that they can actually work with in their kitchens. And then finally, a matchmaker to help find farms. So putting these two responses together gave us a little bit of insight in terms of how we can continue to, not start, New York is doing a great job, but how we can continue to provide that right support. So we really do need to continue to train food service directors on how to plan menus to incorporate New York grown food or local food at the right time. And then also how to actually procure New York grown foods, how to navigate those regulations. Because when school staff request items from their vendors up front or within bids, it helps to ensure that more New York food products are offered and purchased. And that might start with planning and menu planning, and then filter into their procurement process. And here we had a distributor that we spoke to within this research process, giving Buffalo some props or a shout out that they do a really good job with this. Second, of course, that administrative support to help food service directors navigate all the ins and outs of buying New York grown food. So we're getting really into the nitty-gritty here. Farm to school coordinators are folks that work with schools and provide them with all different kinds of support. And we have some farm to school coordinators across the state. You can see them in the orange circle with the star inside of them because they are superstars. They often help schools, man, the list is so long, but they help them plan menus, they help them procure New York grown food, they help them connect with local farmers, they help them prepare bids, they help them set up plans to process or minimally process food so they can have it throughout the school year. Farm to school coordinators are really such superstars when it comes to our farm to school ecosystem here in New York State. And you can see just by looking at this map in green, you have geographic markers for the schools that applied for the 30% program in 2019. And then the orange for where the farm to school coordinators are. And you really do see a pretty clear geographic overlap between schools that felt prepared to apply and where farm to school coordinators are. So this is really important to point to. We even have this quote from Oneida Herkimer Madison Bosse's, just showing how important farm to school coordinators are to the success of their program. And then really would be remiss to not mention investing in the farm to school supply chain and investing in kitchen equipment, the actual capital costs that enable schools to purchase, handle, and that get the food from the farmer to the school in a form that they can handle. So just another really important consideration to point to here, something else that we found in our research is that we were asking schools, where do you buy your New York grown food? And by dollar value, schools reported purchasing most of their local food through their main distributor. That was 61% of responses said we buy from a distributor. And then the next largest was directly from a farmer at 17%, and you can see the rest here. Then we asked schools, okay, so when you're procuring New York grown food, how do you track geographic origin? Do you have a system to do that? 59% of schools responded no, and 41% of schools said yes, we do have a system to do that. We dug a little deeper. Of those schools that do report having such a system, 70% indicated relying solely on their distributor to provide this information. So the honesty and accuracy of the information distributors provide to schools was really paramount in how the schools understood how much New York grown food they were purchasing. And this led us to scratch our heads a little bit. And this is perhaps one of the most important areas that New York and other states need to look at, that if we want to ensure that program benefits reach our farmers, that we need to ensure that there really is integrity in the reporting and paperwork throughout the supply chain. And right now, with the way that New York has its program set up, it's set up really easily or for schools to be able to provide paperwork in theory easily. Of course, you know, we're working on that too. But to be able to provide paperwork to affirm that they got to 30%. And so the accuracy of that claim relies on the accuracy of that paperwork. Currently, we don't really have an audit or system built in to trace back or track or see if that paperwork is accurate. And that is a big recommendation that we really make to the state. Because we need to ensure that the geographic origin information being provided to schools is trustworthy to ensure that the benefits of this program are reaching the farm gate. Just really quickly, I want to go through the New York City case study because here in New York, we are perhaps unique that we've got the largest school district in the country, and we also have very small rural schools. So helping different types of schools get to 30% is going to perhaps look different. And New York City is really very dedicated to the 30% initiative and to farm to school in general. They were a New York Thursday pioneer, and they serve over 1 million students every day, and their total annual food budget is $240 million. Which is really quite high. And if we were to get them to 30%, that would be an amazing feat with benefits that could really trickle down to our farmers and with healthy New York grown food reaching students that really, really do need it. But New York City has some complicated challenges that it faces unlike any other school. They've got a really complicated structure, many diffuse buildings across the state, across the city, pardon me. And they also operate through regionalized contracts serviced by 4 main distributors, and the contracts last for a long time. So if they're going to get to 30%, it's going to take them some time. City procurement regulations may need to be adjusted because this really makes it difficult for New York City to procure locally. They're going to need some aggregation in the marketplace to supply them with enough local food. And New York City also said that they really do need breakfast to be included because it's just impossible for them to separate out lunch if they're going to try and comply with this program. And they estimate, though, that it will take them to 3 to 5 years, so they remain optimistic in thinking that they could really get there. And wouldn't that be quite amazing? So, knowing all of that, we have made a few recommendations to New York State and that other states can learn from if they're looking to design their own incentive program. First, We have to keep this program going. We saw that New York City may take 3 to 5 years, perhaps more now, given the budgetary challenges they're facing, to get to 30%. They remain dedicated, they remain passionate, but we have to keep funding this program so that they and other schools have the opportunity to build their systems and support to get to 30%. And then we also have to keep funding that farm to school grants program, because it does provide quite a lot of support to schools in getting on the pathway to get to 30%. Along those same lines, it would be advisable to create a coordinated network of regional and statewide farm to school coordinators that serve every school district across New York. This can be done through the Farm to School Grants program, and that coordinated network of support could provide one-on-one assistance to schools and communicate between one another so that schools don't need to reinvent the wheel, and other regions from the state can continue to learn from one another how we can really build this support system to revolutionize the food that we're serving in our school cafeterias. To that end, when possible, it is important to increase funding for this grants program. It's a wildly popular program, consistently oversubscribed at about double the funding requests than funds that it has available to give. And it funds so many important projects, from funding farm to school coordinator positions to funding equipment and training for staff, so that schools can really build up a robust farm to school program that enables them to get onto the pathway to reach 30%. This is critically important complement to the incentive program. Of course, as mentioned before, we also have to make sure our benefits are reaching our farmers. I know that we're working on getting the reporting and paperwork structures set up so that schools know what they need to provide to the state education department to affirm they got to 30%. But once we get there and once we really get our feet under us, we have to look to incorporate measures like random audits to ensure that the geographic origin labeling on the paperwork that schools are providing is accurate. To improve program accessibility, we really do also need to look to expand the program beyond lunch. As mentioned before, focusing just on lunch creates barriers administratively for schools, and also that creative accounting that might lessen the overall impact of the program and just shift purchases from one meal to lunch rather than increasing them overall. And we, of course, would not want that to be the case. But this needs to be done in a thoughtful way, because we can't just include other meals in the accounting to get to 30%. We have to make sure that the program is still generating more purchases in the marketplace. Also important to make procurement easier. We want to provide that training and support to schools through farm to school coordinators and through other organizations. Finesse runs a Farm to School Institute and local food buyer learning center. We have training programs, Cornell has training, but at the end of the day, providing all this support and training to learn how to navigate this patchwork of regulations, we just really need to look to the regulations to think about how we can make it easier for schools to purchase locally. Right now, our regulatory system is really geared towards competitive, least cost awards to those that can provide things to schools at the cheapest price. And I know we have structures built in, like percentage preference legislation and geographic preference bids that schools can use, but learning how to navigate those are really timely. So we just have to think of better ways that we can make procurement easier at the local, state, and federal level. And then finally, would be remiss without, again, touching on supply chain gaps and investing in farm to school capital projects across New York, whether that's minimal processing or aggregation or storage or equipment within schools so that they can handle purchasing and serving fresh food to kids that come from farms. So then I just want to again touch on the fact that we are doing a follow-up survey this summer related to how we can incorporate other meals into this program and how COVID is impacting farm to school. And we'll have an addendum report released October of this year. So if you want to stay in the loop, sign up for updates at finesse.org. And we'll also be doing a webinar just like this one to go through the findings of that research, probably in October. But we also do need further research to assess what support farmers need to sell to institutions like schools, to assess the economic impacts of this program at the farm level or by commodity, to better understand the public health impact of this program, to identify where the gaps in the supply chain are so we know where to direct capital investment, and then of course to expand to other institutions using this model. And we are at the question and answer portion of the webinar. But if folks also, if you're from other states and you want to write in the chat box, hearing what New York's unique challenges are, if you have strategies that your state employs that would help us address some of our challenges and barriers and make this program a success, I also welcome you inputting that kind of information. So now, if folks have any questions, I'm going to take a look at the question box to see if we have any that have already come in that need an answer, and just continue to type questions in. And thank you again for being here. So let's see if we have any questions that need answering so far. All right, so we had one question, are people going to push to eliminate the lunch only provision? And this is from a school food service director. I'm tired of counting production records and not serving New York State foods at breakfast. It would be so much easier. Great question. We are, is the short answer. This is an active conversation that's going on at the state level. We're going to revisit that hopefully this session with the governor's office and with our legislative champions. And yeah, we certainly want to make sure that this program has as broad of an impact as it possibly can, and eliminate those administrative barriers of focusing only on lunch. And that is, as I said, what our one of the main impetus for the survey that we are doing this summer. And we got another question about how farms are introducing nutrition education. Will the Department of Education address improvements virtually throughout the curriculum? I'm not sure. It's a great question because, of course, farm to school, while I focused a lot on procurement, farm to school really is not the only, or procurement is not the only facet of farm to school. And education and educating kids about where their food comes from and about proper nutrition is a really important piece of farm to school. So we certainly have stakeholders that are actively working on that in New York. But I can't answer for the Department of Education. Hopefully we'll continue to build that support system and that type of curriculum moving forward. And we got a question when I say protein, that schools bought more protein. Are we including protein-rich plant-based foods or just animal products? I'd need to look back at our back data, but I do believe when we said protein, we were meaning animal products. Though we did ask about protein-rich plant-based foods as well in the survey. And there is more detailed information about what schools want to purchase that's in our report. So here's a question. How have distributors been helpful or a challenge to data collection for schools? That's a great question. So I can't answer in terms of how they've been helpful or a challenge. But, you know, in terms of distributors getting up to speed on the kinds of paperwork that schools need, that is an active area of work for us, for schools, for our partners. This is a new program, so there's a learning curve for everyone. And, you know, in terms of knowing the proper verbiage to put on invoices, or if it's for a processed product, they're required to provide a product formulation statement. So I think that it's a matter of training and training distributors and other vendors what information they need to provide. And that has been an active effort. And maybe there are other schools that would be able to answer in terms of whether they've been helpful or a challenge. All right, and we've got a question. Where's the funding for this coming from? Great question. Is it written to the general fund or from a tax? So there is no dedicated tax that goes towards funding this program. It is written into the general fund. But there are, you know, of course, tax opportunities or ideas that other organizations have put forward to fund efforts like this, things like a soda tax potentially, or other types of policies that will direct purchasing more towards healthy and local foods. We got a question, do we know why breakfast was not originally included in the initiative? So this is a good question. I can't say exactly why, but I can talk about the sort of gestation of the policy. So when the governor first introduced this program, it was if school food authorities spend 30% of their total food costs on food from, and you saw the language, farmers, growers, producers, or processors, they get an additional 19 cents or up to 25 cents for their lunch per meal reimbursement. And when we looked at that proposal and thought about the impacts that that might have on schools, for those high need schools that are providing more breakfast, after school meals, and other meals, we realized that it would be more cost prohibitive for those high need schools to be able to meet that 30% threshold. And for schools that were just serving lunch, it would be a lower bar for them because their budget would be lower, but they'd need to meet 30% of that cost. So this was the solution. This was sort of the compromise that was negotiated. If you're only going to give the reimbursement for lunch, then we should really only be looking at lunch costs. Now, of course, we know that that's created some additional administrative burdens, but it is, you know, we all negotiated an improvement, I think, on the original proposal as we all thought more about it. But hopefully we'll be able to negotiate an improvement further as we've learned that now there's an administrative hurdle for schools to overcome. And I know that many are already looking at this question, so hopefully it will be solved within the next few years. Any long-term plans to open up this funding to early childcare or even other large institutions like hospitals? That is an excellent question. We certainly internally hope to learn lessons from this program in Farm to School and seek to advocate for similar programs that address the unique barriers or hurdles that other institutions face. So some might not face a cost barrier because they're not under the same types of regulatory structures that schools are facing when they're procuring food, that they need to award to the least cost bidder. We just don't know that yet. But you know, we are Farm to Institution New York State, not just Farm to School New York State. So we are really hoping to look to other institutions for policy adjustments that will help them procure more New York grown food and support local farmers. Do you anticipate that it will be harder for schools to meet the local food threshold with COVID-19? That is a great question. I think that one thing we know, because we don't know yet, but one thing we know is that this is not top of mind for schools, even for our farm to school champions, our early adopters, our passionate folks who have been working on this even through this pandemic and finding ways to still buy and support local. You know, I think that with reopening going the way it is, being so touch and go, I think that that is certainly an additional hurdle. We're going to see a different participation rate in year 3 for this program, but you know, we're really not sure. And actually, with the research that we're doing, that is one of the questions we're asking. So hopefully, we'll have more answers for you in our October webinar. All right, we've got time for just another couple questions here. Let's see what we can get to. This is a great question. If food service managers set meals for a season, how can schools connect with farms to procure ahead of time for the fall or winter? Great question. So this is really where that proactive menu planning comes in. In fact, school food procurement happens even earlier than we all expect. So something we found in our research is that many schools are buying or putting out bids in January of the prior year for their following year, for the whole year. So having a farm to school coordinator, active training to help those schools build in local items to their menu and then build the procurement of those items into their bids is really where schools need to go. Our research shows us. Hopefully that answers that question. There was a question about tracing requirements in the event of a product recall. That is not my area of expertise, but as far as I know, from the, oh geez, and now my brain is not going to be working, but from the new food safety regulations that are slowly being put into place from the federal government, I do believe that there is enhanced traceability that's built in the event of a recall. Let's see if we have any other questions here. We got time for one more. Any concerns with funding being lowered due to the budgetary challenges from COVID-based expenses? And I assume that that's a question about state funding. A really important question right now. Certainly, I know New York, just like so many other states, is really facing some fiscal challenges at the state level. We have concerns about that with all our state programs, but we hope that programs like this one that show so much potential, not just for economic recovery and rebuild, but also to invest in our future, in our kids, and the health of our kids, that these are the types of programs that will be retained and will survive. As a local taxpayer, this is the kind of program I want my funding to be going towards in good times, but especially in bad. So hopefully this is the kind of program that will remain. And I know that we've got a champion in Governor Cuomo. We've got a champion in many members of the legislature who will work to ensure that that happens. And I think that that's all that we have time for, and hopefully a positive note to end on. I just want to reiterate again, thanks to all of you for joining us for this webinar, and encourage you both to visit finys.org, FINYS.org, to sign up for updates so that you can hear about when we do have that addendum report. that will answer a lot of these questions about how to include other meals and potential COVID impacts. So please sign up for updates at finesse.org so that you can hear about when that addendum report is released, and then also can join another webinar to learn about what we found. And in addition, I also encourage you to visit www.farmland.org/growing-opportunity to read our report or the executive summary if you haven't done so already. And if you have questions at any time, you see the contact information there on the screen and you know where to reach me. And thank you all for your interest, for your work, and hopefully we can all continue to work together to revolutionize school food in New York and across the country.